Okay, welcome to our Eid of Shabbat Parashat class, Parashat Shemini, the most powerful silence. I'm talking, of course, about Torah and our Tanakh and our history. That moment when Am Yisrael finally got to the point that they were waiting for the inauguration of the Mishkan, the house of God, and the moment of great interaction with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It says, Vayar kol ha'am vayaronu, they rejoiced, it was ecstasy. And that very moment, almost simultaneously, according to some, there was the Yezeram and Hashamayim, the decree from heaven, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to take the lives of the holy sons of Aharon, Nadav, and Abihu. We will not be engaging in the discussion of them, their so-called sin, what they did, the decision of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to kill them at that moment, rather the immediate aftermath. In the immediate aftermath of their death, Moshe approaches Aharon. First, he gives instructions. The first thing he does is approach Aharon. And we're in Perek Yud in Vayikra, chapter 10. We're in Pasuk Gimal, the third Pasuk. And it says, Vayomen Moshe el Aharon, Hu asher deber Adonai lemor bekrobai kadesh. This is exactly what God was talking about, says Moshe to Aharon. With those who are close to me, I shall be sanctified. Ve'al peneh chol ha'am ekabed. In the presence of the nation, I will be glorified or respected. Vayidom Aharon. For lack of a better term, and Aharon was silent. The Targum Unkilu says there are two versions. One is the Shabbah Aharon, and he praised, and the other one is Ushtek, and he was silent. Interesting. Let's talk about that silence. First, let's try to give an explanation to the silence. And let's try to give an explanation to the word Vayidom, the etymology of that word. What exactly was Aharon's reaction? What does that indicate to us when the Torah tells us Vayidom? Was it positive? Was it negative? And once we can establish the explanation and description of what Aharon was doing at that scene, what Vayidom really means, we can then start to possibly give some reasons. And we need to do all this by tracking the terminologies elsewhere in Tanakh of the word Vayidom. Again, for lack of a better term, and he was silent. And eventually we can actually relate this to the perspective, the attitude, proper attitude of Am Yisrael throughout Jewish history and up to modern day. So really, I'd like to start with the Pirush of the Rashbam. And the Rashbam essentially says that Vayidom is silence, but really means lack of activity. It means a refrain, refraining from that which was expected of him or from that which would have been common for him. And I'll tell you what I mean. The Rashbam is really reflecting to what he means, a pasuk in Yehezkel Hanabi. The prophet Yehezkel, and this is Perek Kaf Dalet, chapter 24 on Yehezkel, pasuk Tet, Vav, Tet Zayin, and Yud Zayin. There Hashem informs Yehezkel Hanavi of the unfortunate news. He tells him, Ben Adam, I'm taking your most precious person, is referring to his wife, in a sudden death. And what did Yehezkel do? Nothing wrong. This was apparently, and as the Pesukim unfold, going to be an example that Hashem was making of Yehezkel Hanavi, partially a rebuke to the people that was going to demonstrate the unfortunate fate of Am Yisrael in general. And he told them as follows, your wife will be taken from you. You won't be able to eulogize her. You won't be able to cry. Meaning you shouldn't. He's prohibiting him from doing that. And of course, this was going to be the example for Am Yisrael Bad Minan, but this happened to us, of course, suffering throughout Jewish history, and sometimes oppression and massacre to the extent that we won't have the wherewithal, the time, and the ability even to mourn the dead. Of course, this happened to us over and over again in Jewish history. What a tragic prediction of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and here a model by Yehezkel, unfortunately, Hanavi. But in this, he told him, Ha'anek dom metim. Ha'anek dom metim. It's a fascinating terminology. Basically, ha'anek means to moan or to cry out. Dom here means to be silent, metim. And if you just change the words around a little bit, what you get is be silent from or refrain from the moaning or the crying out on the deceased. In other words, and by the way, these few Pesukim are actually a source for many laws of Avelut. Don't do what normally would be the case when someone passes away. Don't be silent from that. Says the Rashbam, that is in simplicity what Vayidom Aharon means in this pasuk. In other words, Aharon was silent or refrained from that which was normally expected in a normal situation of someone. To be sure, there's actually an halacha in Shulchan Aruch, and Yoreh De'ah, the laws of Avelut, in chapter 394, Shin Sadi Dalet, which indicates that normally a person is appropriate to cry for the deceased. In fact, the Ramban says, Bad Minan, someone loses a child, that not crying would be a cruelty. He's expected in general, all Avilim are expected to cry. And the halacha says that Shlosha Yamim Labechi, 3 days for crying. However, and so Aharon, what are you doing? Aren't you mourning for your child? However, in the spirit of the law, but in a you can say a higher standard, Aharon fulfilled the next part of the halacha, or the earlier actual part, and that's Sa'if and Shulchan Aruch, and that is En mitkashin al hamed yoter midai. You don't go overboard in the way that you are crushed and affected from the deceased. In other words, that you have to draw a line somewhere, and you have to move on. And it says, something negative about someone who does that. Rather, cry for 3 days. In other words, crying is expected, crying is appropriate, and then draw a line. So that would be the normal protocol in a normal situation for a normal person. But for some reason, the great Aharon HaKohen made a decision by Yidom. He said that this law of not going carried away, I'm going to start with that. I'm going to refrain from the beginning. I will not engage at all in this normally appropriate behavior of crying. I will completely refrain. Now, the question is why? The answer might be in the context over here, but that at least explains to us of what is happening, of what the Vayidom is describing in terms of the scene and what Aharon actually did. There are different commentaries on what he might have done, but this is really the Rashbam is the leader of the pack, and most follow the Rashbam on this. He refrained from any type of public demonstration of mourning and crying. We can't imagine what was going on in his head as a father, obviously, but this is what he did. So let's try to understand why, and let's further extend the real power of the word Vayidom, and really a general perspective of Am Yisrael to tragedy through finding other sources of Vayidom. And so I bring us to a pasuk in Echa. Echa, the book of mourning, the book that we read on Tisha B'Av, authored by Yirmiyahu Hanavi, which not only is our crying for and our regret for the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, which was the event upon which this book was authored, but crying for all times in the book of Echa. And in the long chapter 3 of Echa, And I'm going to start maybe a pasuk or two beforehand. We're in pasuk kaf vav 26. It says tov yachil b'dumam l'truat Adonai. It's proper to hope and aspire, and their dumam, maybe be silently anticipate the salvation of God. The next pasuk, tov lagever ki yisa'ol bin orav. It's proper for a young man to carry a burden in his youth. There's a separate lesson about life in general from that pasuk. Let's move on. And then finally, pasuk kaf het, which is what we're aiming for. Yeshev badad v'yidom. There it is. Ki natal alav. He sits alone in silence. Ki natal alav, because it was carried upon him. So what does that mean? Ki natal alav. So there are some commentators that say that it's referring to Hashem, because Hashem natal placed upon him what? A decree. And him here represents Am Yisrael, placed upon Am Yisrael a decree of tragedy. And whenever, well, that's starting with the Beit HaMikdash's destruction, and whenever tragedy has found us throughout history, God placed a tragedy. Or you can also say Ki natal alav, because he took it upon himself, or Am Yisrael. And what does that mean? What that really means is that silence, that sitting in silence, is an acceptance by Am Yisrael. It is a non-questioning of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's the ability to understand, as it says elsewhere in Echa, Mipi Ayon lo toseh hara'ot ve'hatov, that God doesn't do evil. And that obviously there is, beyond our knowledge, and we trust HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a reason for such tragedy. And the reaction of a Jew, and specifically, and Am Yisrael generally, when such things happen that are difficult to understand, is, as the Pasuk in Echa says, Vayidom. And so there's something about the silence, and therefore also the silence of Aharon, which goes beyond just the behavior of being silent and not engaging in crying, but there's also a certain acceptance. There's an attitude of not questioning HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of knowing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows exactly what he's doing, and ki natal alav, of holding that decree that's been placed upon him or on us in general as a nation, and knowing that there is a God out there, and that God is a perfect God, and that there is nothing evil that emanates from him. We don't understand, but we know. And then there is possibly another level of Vayidom Aharon, also implicit in the word, also embodied by Aharon, and also demonstrated by Am Yisrael in our perspective to tragedy. And an unusual other source I'll bring you, the word Vayidom, and that is in the book of Yehoshua. And there, Yehoshua ben Nun, in battle, in his battle as he entered Eretz Canaan, he prayed, he said, I need time, buy me time, God. Hashemesh b'giv'on dom v'hayareah be'emek hayalon. And he prayed, I need time to stop. Vayidom Hashemesh. God made a miracle for Yehoshua ben Nun. Vayidom Hashemesh. The sun was silent, or the sun just stopped. But what it really means in that context is that the sun obeyed. The sun was obedient. The sun said, yes, God, I will. And the sun stopped with Yehoshua ben Nun in something supernatural and miraculous. And we as Jews, and this really, I want to refer you to now the context of the Pasuk, and a comment made by Sforno. So let's go back to our Pasuk. It was Pasuk Gimal, and Moshe Rabbeinu's explanation. And he conveyed a message to Aharon, which we're not going to analyze in detail, but just in general, B'krovaya Kadesh. God says that I sanctify myself with those who are closer, with those who are elevated, with those who are holy, you can say. And that's the way I'm glorified. And that, in brief, what Moshe Rabbeinu, was telling Aharon is that there's a real reason for this. This reason is not just some consolation. This reason is productive. This reason has meaning to it. And it's foreigner on the spot on Vayidom Aharon says Shehitnahem Yekidush Hashem Shenichdash B'motam. At that moment, Aharon understood that a Kiddush Hashem has just been made. Explained to him by Moshe Rabbeinu that this is not only is this not necessarily a moment of tragedy, this is a moment of greatness. Greatness. My son's just died. Yes, of greatness. Yes, of greatness. Do you understand? Maybe not. But this was Moshe Rabbeinu's insight at that moment to Aharon. B'krovaya Kadesh, a Kiddush Hashem was just made. Let's not go into the how of that. Let's trust Moshe Rabbeinu for the moment. But it's the Vayidom. Here, it's the reaction now, is a reaction of understanding. I get it, says Aharon. I understand, says Sporonov. That was a consolation for him. The fact that he understood. He was obedient to God like the sun, Vayidom Hashemesh. But a positive obedience, and that I know exactly what God is up to. Maybe not connecting the dots, but knowing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu not only is an acceptance, does everything for the good, but Sadiq Adonai b'chol derachav v'hasid b'chol ma'asav. He's righteous. Not only isn't he evil, it says in Echa that evil doesn't emanate from him. Of course not. But not only that, only righteousness emanates from him. That's another level. One is a level of acceptance of the Jewish people in tragedy. I accept God's decree, and I don't question God. A whole other level is a level of understanding that Sadiq Hashem b'chol derachav, that there's righteousness here, that there's really something powerful behind this, that there's a productive purpose, that within Jewish tragedy, within Jewish tragedy layeth the Jewish salvation. God is Zorei Sadakot. He's planting seeds of salvation. So difficult in the moment of tragedy to relate to such things. But faithful Jews understand that not only is not God perpetrating evil, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu, quite to the contrary, is somehow in his inconspicuous ways that we cannot really understand at the moment, but eventually will understand, is painting a much bigger picture, a one that we don't have the ability to see. We're myopic, we're tunnel vision. We can only see what's in front of us. But there's a greater picture that God, in the tapestry in life, is synthesizing all the variables together. And that is Sadiq Hashem b'chol derachav, righteous in all his ways. And therein lie the reaction of Aharon, not just an actual mannerism of refrain from mourning as he saw appropriate at that moment of celebration of the inauguration of the Mishkan, not just the acceptance of a Vayidom, Kina Tal Alav, accepting the decree of God, because from God does not emanate evil, but also a Vayidom Aharon of understanding HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Vayidom Hashemesh, of Sadiq Hashem b'chol derachav, that really in the big picture, there's something great about what HaKadosh Baruch Hu just did. And therein lie in the demonstration, the paradigm, and the behavior of Aharon HaKohen, Vayidom Aharon, the most powerful silence possibly, a deafening silence of acceptance and understanding of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not just by our great Aharon, but the Jewish nation's perspective throughout Jewish history, Vayidom. Baruch Adonai L'olam, Amen v'Amen, Shabbat Shalom.
We accept